you might have. We're going to have three of these training sessions, BA, QA, and Dev, which you're going to go over at it from different perspectives. So some of your questions, if they're more related to a sprint or more related to testing, obviously will be covered by different people. But Brett has been a fantastic part of my team that I'm a part of up here in Nashville with Consumer Channel. Very knowledgeable on the subject. And I'm going to turn it over to him and make sure he's got plenty of time for you guys and any questions you may have. So Brett, thank you so much for helping us out on this. And it's all you.
All right. Thanks, Jordan. And I'm happy to sit down with you guys and talk through anything. So this is super informal. If you have questions along the way, stop me and ask. You don't have to necessarily wait to the end. I do have, you'll see on the next slide, I do have a packed agenda, but we aren't likely to get through all of it. But I did want to at least call out all of the different sections and things that we can discuss just in case we want to go a different direction than what I had already planned. So I'm just allowing for, since I haven't met you all and worked with you all as closely as I have with Jordan, if there is a subject that you see that you want to kind of change gears and talk through from a BA perspective, then I'm totally open to that. I want you all to get as much out of this as possible. I want to make sure that you get what you need. So in our hour together. All right, cool. So with that said, these are kind of all of the points that I could think of really quickly that we could go through today. So I'm going to do a really quick process overview first, just kind of high level of the process as it pertains to JIRA from the time something is asked for from the business all the way through to deployment. And then, so I'll give a really quick overview of that. It is an eye chart. I'm going to go ahead and warn you right now. But I can send these slides out at the end so that you could see that piece if you want to dig down into it a little bit further. Then we'll go through the different record types. We'll attempt to go through the fields as much as we can. I'm not going to be able to touch all of them because, you know, if you've been in JIRA for a day or more, you could see that there are literally dozens and dozens and dozens of fields in there. So I'm only going to touch on the ones that I think that I use the most and that I think would probably be more valuable for us to touch on as a group. However, I am a resource for you after this session is over. So if you have questions, or if you have a question during the session and I don't have an answer to it, I'll figure it out for you. I'll go ask or point you in the right direction. But there are a lot of fields, so I'm not going to touch on all of them. I'll just touch on the ones I think are most important to the group. And then we have the portfolio view, so the different views. So the portfolio view, the different boards, searching, logging time, dashboards, and of course, throughout. You don't have to wait till the end to ask questions. If you have a question as I'm talking, please stop me and ask. So again, I know some of the print on here is a little small, so I'll go through this really quickly. So when an idea comes in through the BRM or sometimes straight through the BA, sometimes it comes in through Dev. However, the idea or request for something to be changed comes in, it starts there. And if it's a big enough ask, we create an ask for it. So that is going to be, and I'll go through the different records in a second. So I'm not going to break apart what that ask is, but at that level, it's managed by the BRM. It gets approved, and then it moves through to the BA. So we after the BA, and sometimes depending on what the ask is, sometimes the dev team, maybe the dev manager, reviews what that ask is at a high level, so that we can start to get an idea of functionally how we'll make it happen, and also strategically and from a timeline and priority and backlog setting perspective. Once we get an idea for that, then the BA starts to create epics and stories. So those epics are going to be a bundle of stories. They break down the ask into smaller pieces or feature sets, and then those stories are going to be those individual features that that optimistically can get done in one sprint, is what a story would be. So then we size the stories. It's really important, once as we're creating the stories, that once we move it along in the status, kind of in the status chain, that we have the data that needs to be in the story at that particular moment in the process. So I'll give an example. That can be a little confusing. I'll give an example. If you're at the sizing stage, you would need everything in that story so that the devs and QA can weigh in on it and have an educated decision about how much it's going to take, how long it's going to take, how many resources it's going to take to make that story happen. And then from there, once the stories are sized, then we start planning the sprint out, what's going to go in that particular sprint, where that story is going to slot in. Then the dev team does their magic. QA team then goes back and checks what we have against the acceptance criteria that was included in the story. And then they demo that back out to the BA dev manager, deployment manager, and the BRM, just to make sure, sometimes with the business too, depending on what the ask is. But the QA team demos that back out to make sure that that's what we asked for. And then it's scheduled for deployment and rolled out. So it's a really Cliff Notes version of the entire process. They may or may not have already been a repeat for you. So if it is, I apologize. But as many times as I've looked at this process, it does help every so often to kind of make sure to kind of ground myself in the process and make sure that I remember each individual step along the way. So here are the record types. So you have your ask, which is the high level umbrella request. That's the record type that kind of houses everything underneath it. That's where the business comes and says, hey, we need a way to do self-checkout for parts that are pulled in a salvage yard, right? So that's a high level. We don't have any details yet. They just tell us this is what we want. Go make it happen. That high level request houses a strategic reason why we want to do it from the business. We usually get that from the business. An executive summary of what all it's going to entail, value statement, any kind of budgetary information that we have high level can be included in the ask. So everything that you would need to know about the project from a high level can be included in that ask. And the more data in there, the better. And usually the BRM manages that piece, if there is a BRM. Sometimes, depending on what it is, there could be a different role that manages at the ask level, but typically it's the BRM. Or whoever's acting as the BRM for that particular project. And then underneath the ask, we break the ask down into chunks of feature sets. So at the feature set level, for self-checkout, for example, if we want to do self-checkout, then we break that down into all the different things that are going to have to happen in order for us to have self-checkout at Walmart. So we need cash registers, we need space for it. We need software that's gonna scan the barcodes and save it to the database, into inventory. All of these things have to happen, and those are big chunks. We would have to break down in order to make it happen. So that's what the epic is. It breaks the ask down into those different feature sets of features. You can also label it whether or not this is a business priority. This is something that we need to do as an IT group for ourselves, some to keep the lights on issues, or if it's just continuous improvement, right? So it's a improvement on something that we've already built, and we're not capitalizing on it. It's something that we're building to make something better. We're improving it. And then typically the BA is going to manage epics, or someone who is acting as the BA. For this particular project is going to manage all of those epics. And then you come down from there to the story level, and this is where we break it down into smaller bite-sized chunks of features. So again, I'll go back to my Walmart example. This is where you would say, for the software that we need that's going to manage anything that a customer scans, we'll need a piece that saves it to inventory or takes that product out of inventory. We'll need a UI that's easy to use. We'll need blue buttons as opposed to yellow buttons, since Walmart's primary colors are blue. We'll need to arrange the screen a certain way. We'll need to move through different screens. So all of that's at the story level. And even those sometimes can be their own epics, depending on how many different things you want to have. So one of the rules of thumb I have when creating a story, it doesn't always work out this way, as Jordan could probably attest, but I try to think about a story in terms of something that can be done in one sprint. And sometimes you don't know that until you get to either a dev grooming, maybe an arc review, or a meeting with the development team to know whether, or sometimes it's even as late as sizing, that you don't know that it's going to take a little bit. It may take a little bit more than one sprint. But the object is as you're writing the story and you're breaking out the different ask into epics and epics into stories, a good rule of thumb to have is if create the story as if it can be done in 1 2-week sprint. If it takes longer than 2 weeks, then it probably needs to be broken into 2 stories or more, 2 or more stories.
Hey, Brett, can I interrupt you real quick? This is James.
Sure. Yep.
One of the things I've seen on other teams I've worked on, when you get to this level, if you're unsure of breaking it down into smaller stories and whatnot, a lot of times you end up doing a like you mentioned, arc review, and you schedule that as a separate story that has no physical output other than being able to break it down. So you assign someone the task and assign them X number of work hours to look at this and say what all is going to be needed from a development standpoint to make this work. And then they investigate, they go off on their own, investigate it, and then come back and say, this is what I've done. And then you get it generates stories. So the story as a kind of like a technical debt type of thing, turns out to be generating the stories that provide you with the bite-sized pieces that can be done on a story basis.
Yep. What was your name again? Would you say James? Did you say that was your name?
Say again?
Yeah. So great point. And thanks for bringing that up. So you mentioned, I think I heard at least 1 or 2 different types of record types that I don't have on the screen right here. One is a tech debt and the other is a spike. So if it does get to the level in consumer channel, we try not to have spikes that often because our BRM is allergic to them. Partly because we don't necessarily, you have to be careful with spikes and doing research, because sometimes some of that research can be done with just a conversation, right? So from an agile, just outside of JIRA and LKQ, agile in the agile methodology, it talks about conversations over process and that sort of thing. So sometimes those things can be handled with just a conversation between a couple people. And I would say that it's very important, like you just mentioned, that if it can't be done in a few minutes talking to each other, or even an hour, just talking it out, then it does, and it needs to be a longer investigation. You need to dig into kind of what our setup is to see what it's going to take to get it done. Then yes, a spike, sometimes even a tech debt needs to be created so that we can do the background work, so that we do it right the first time. So sometimes it's good to go ahead and invest that time up front versus getting into the story and then the story carrying over sprint to sprint to sprint to sprint, because you're having to do the quote unquote spike or tech debt work in the story.
Right. And normally what we used is, like, if at the sizing, when we were looking at it, we came up and we says, well, this is too big. If we couldn't in that time period a lot, come up with it, then we usually created the spike and said, okay, let's investigate how to break this. But as you pointed out, you try to minimize spikes because there's really no functional output from the spike.
Yep.
So,
yep. And this isn't a hard and fast rule that, a story should be sized at a sprint, kind of sprint sized. Because I've had a couple of stories myself where you have to have a break point in the story, and sometimes stories there just isn't a visible break point where you can split it out. It makes it even tougher to split work between two devs or between two sprints. Sometimes it's easier just to say, all right, we're going to assign it to the sprint, knowing that there's a high likelihood it's going to carry to the next, just because we want the continuity of having one dev work on it the entire time. So sometimes that happens. It's rare, and like I said, the best practice is that you break it out so that you can deliver something each sprint. But sometimes that doesn't happen. I guess it's just kind of like I said, the rule of thumb is as you're creating the story, just kind of keep in mind that you want to give the devs enough work, but you also don't want to give them so much work that the story has to flip from sprint to sprint to sprint and carry over.
All right, good points. Looks like Scott, did you have a question?
Yeah, I got a couple of questions. At what point do you submit these for deployment through CAB? At the epic level, story level, or can you do it either way based on what the components are that you've built?
It's at the story level.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, it's at the story level. If you've built a bunch of components at the story level to get them into sprints, but the overall package as an epic is what you want to release to the users, would you do it after the stories are all done?
Yeah, that'd be on a case-by-case. Yeah, definitely on a case-by-case basis. I mean, we would keep track of it. And I can show you some more of that stuff as we move along as well. And
Okay.
I'll give you guys a quick rendition of what we're showing here with record types. The ask is Thanksgiving dinner. Epics would be the turkey, the mashed potatoes, the salad. A story would be cooking the turkey, cooking the potatoes, mashing the potatoes, chopping the lettuce, that type of stuff. An iteration bug would be the gravy's too lumpy. The potatoes need more pepper, things like that. So that's how it kind of breaks down. If you look at it from the overall, just like you said, Scott, we're not going to serve individual pieces for a Thanksgiving dinner. That would be an example of we serve it all at one time. However, you could also do certain epics and features that you can put out on a more routine basis, or even on a story-by-story basis that gets put out into production but isn't used until we link everything together. But that's a good question.
Okay. Got it.
I mean, we could show the current asks that are being reviewed on a weekly basis by the pig team, and just demo those. I mean, I'm sure you got the link to that since you're sharing your screen. It may clear up some things as to how all of these do if we just show an example of an existing one that corporate's using.
Yeah, I'm sure he's going to get there. So I'm gonna get it back to Brad and let him continue.
All right.
Yeah. I'll definitely show the portfolio view that kind of breaks it down from record to record. So Jordan magnificently covered the bugs, so I won't spend much time talking about the bugs, the iteration and backlog bugs. The only thing I'll say there is that the rule that we've been going by, that we've been working to standardize over the last couple of months, is that if it was a defect that was found during the development process before it's been released or deployed, then we label that an iteration bug and we handle that during that sprint. If it's a backlog bug, if it's something that within a couple of weeks of us deploying it, we find it and it's related directly to that deployment or that during the release, the release process. And then anything after that, after a couple of weeks is kind of what we've been doing. If it's after a couple of weeks and we find a defect, then we put it in as a continuous improvement item. There's still some we're still maturing when it comes to process. So, I wouldn't say that that's something that's going to be set in stone forever, or it may be that those kinds of things may change. So we've been a little flexible with how we're documenting iteration bugs versus backlog bugs versus continuous improvement. But that's the way that we've been doing it now. That's what we've been standardizing as of late. All right, so then we'll go through the fields. There's a ton of them, like I said, so I'm going to flip over to JIRA. And I also have several links that I'll share too. So this is one good one before I get to the fields. This is one good one too. It breaks down the different statuses, also lets you know which record type, and then it also says, for that record type or types, this is what happens, kind of what the next step is. So it breaks down the process pretty cleanly if you ever have a question about it. But let's go to, actually, I'm going to go to portfolio first before we go to the field, since we just talked about it. So here's the portfolio view. The way I like to think about the portfolio view versus the backlog view is this is what we're going to show to the business to say, this is the timeline, this is high level, what we're going to release for you. We may, depending on what it is, we may deploy it to prod all at one time. Or we may give you those bite-sized chunks along the way. It just depends on if it's something that's established or if we're creating something brand new from the ground up. So if we're creating a web page, for example, we don't want to create a website that only has the first page and send that out to customers and they can't do anything with it, right? We want to give them at least some minimum functionality before we release it out to customers, that sort of thing. So I'll just pick one that I'm working on here. So here's one that I've been working on to display catalytic converters on each vehicle that we get. So at the ask level, it specifically says what the business wants. They want to display the number of available catalytic converters on every vehicle they get. In order to do that, we're going to have several things happen. This is a really simple ask, so there are going to be some, as you can see in the list, that have wildly long list of epics and stories, but this one's a pretty simple, so that's why I wanted to choose this one. So in order for us to do it, the first thing we're going to have to do is determine how many cats based on something, and we picked engine size because there are a bunch of other things that we could have based the number of cats on that, where for a vehicle that vary the number of catalytic converters on it, but we figured the best thing when we compare what the business wanted versus how much work it was going to be on the development team, we settled on engine size. And then this is what we wanted. This is actually what's just left. There were several other things. It wasn't just one story. There were several other. They just have all been released to production already. So we had, and I'm not exactly sure how to bring those back. So you just have to work with my imagination for a second. So at the high level, this is what the business sees. This is what the BRM, the epic level, is usually where the BRM and the BA come together to talk through what it's going to take to make the ask happen. And then at the story level, this is where we start to bring in development, QA, and the BA. This is where the BA works with the development team, and QA is at the story level. So to your point a little bit earlier about whether or not you want to deploy everything at once or sometimes deploy small pieces, it is going to be a case-by-case, project-by-project decision. And it's usually going to be based on what is the minimum feature set that we can deliver to customers that gets them what they need to get. If that makes sense. Does that make sense? Are there any questions on that? I can show another one.
Yeah, this is basically the breakdown. If you look at it, the ask would be our initiative, the epic would be our feature, and the stories would be our PPI. So he's just showing you that it's laid out in exactly the same way, just different naming convention.
Yep. So the ask, so here's another example that has a lot of stuff still in flight. And this is an example of an ask that has multiple components that can be released not all at one time, but can be released at the epic level. Some of them at the feature level, but mostly at the epic level and not the total thing. So this is a CRM a CRM system that we're building from the ground up that our sales teams are going to use or have been using to manage their accounts and clients. So the first epic is to create the actual system. And then there's a bunch of things that have to happen after that system is created. So the quoting system has to be integrated into it. So they want it to be able to quote and see the different quotes for every customer. And when I say customer, I mean like body shops, repair shops, that sort of thing for these salespeople. So there's a quoting system that says, oh, I saw that you quoted out a bunch of stuff in one of our other systems. We don't say that to them, but that's what we do. We could see what they've quoted in some of our other systems, for a specific vehicle. And it's valuable for a salesperson to know the types of vehicles that they're quoting out. And there's also, we want to be able to search from other systems. And so most of this is building, most of these other epics are building upon this first epic of building the system itself. So all of these can be delivered separately. They don't have to go all together. They can be delivered separately. French translations and notes and reporting, all that good stuff can be delivered as we go. But they're all things that the business wanted at the front end. But it was also a discussion that the BRM had with the business to say, all right, well, what can we give you first? What do you need now? And then we can prioritize the rest of the stuff later. Any questions on the portfolio? And then we'll go to the fields.
Oh, I think we're good.
Sweet. Okay, so there are many different ways to get to your story. So I'm going to start at the story level, because I think that's probably where most of us are going to do most of our work, is at the story level. So, and it's pretty consistent. The fields are pretty consistent across asks, epics, and stories. There's a slight variation because of the type and the data that you need in certain records, but they're pretty much laid out the same. And there's a status and all that kind of stuff in each separate record type. So at the top, you'll have your team, your functional lane, and JIRA calls them projects, which to me was a little confusing at the beginning. So your projects are going to be functional lanes. They're not going to be what we at LKQ call a project. It's going to be basically your team is going to be the first link up here at the top, and then the second is the record number. And you can click on.
I think ours is called ATK/Sightline.
ATK. Yeah.
That's what we're pulling.
Got it. And if you click on its hyperlink, so if you click on it, it does search for any record type that has that's under that team, or has that team assigned to it. Then you have of course, your title. You click the pencil to edit it. You have all of your buttons up here at the top that I'll go through. So one, I think this is a really cool, somewhat overlooked. Maybe it's just because I'm a form nerd. In my former life, I used to build these forms in my previous job. So maybe I'm a form nerd a little bit. But this is one of the coolest features. Is that you can edit it. You can edit the form in different places depending on how you like to work. So at the very top, when you click edit, at the very top, there's a button to configure fields. And that is going to configure the fields that you see on this pop-up. So you can customize it to only show, you can customize it to only show fields that you've selected. So if you don't really care about, the capitalized field or the communication level field, some teams use, depending on who you're working with in the business, some teams use communication level, some teams don't. Some teams use, use the capitalized, and some roles don't, right? So every role doesn't use every field, so you can customize it and it'll show in that pop out. If you want to see all the fields, you just click all and it'll show every single field. I do like this view. It is a little congested because it has everything there, but you can also edit every field without going through the JIRA form on the screen behind it here. So you can go through your details that show at the very top. Anything that has a value in it is going to show here. So if there's something filled out here, it'll automatically show in the detail section up here. So if you don't see, this is something I had to learn at the very beginning. If you don't see a field that you have seen before in this detailed section, the most frequent one that people have questions about is the story points. It's likely because there's no value in story points on this screen. So you just click edit and make sure that you're showing the story points field here. And once you put a value in it, it'll pop on the larger form view. But this is a really quick, I think this is a quicker way if you're wanting to edit multiple fields at the same time. I would click the edit button and then you can go through the different tabs. So there's a tab for description that you can edit here. There's a tab for acceptance criteria, and I'll show you why this can be quicker to do it this way if you're editing multiple fields in just a second. And then there's a people field where you can assign, the dev assignee, QA assignee, the reporter, whoever reported it, the person who's assigned to it right now, the BA, all that good stuff. The requester from the business, you can update all of that in the same field. The reason I think that one big reason why I think that can be quicker is if you're going to update, for example, the acceptance criteria and the description, you have to click in it, then you have to wait for it to load, and then it selects everything when you click on it. So you have another click. So that's 3 clicks just to start doing your thing, right? And then you have to save it, or you can just click out of it. That I actually think that is really nice that you can just click out of it versus just clicking one time and then you can go to each one. It's just one click into those fields. So a little bit quicker, save you a couple seconds on each one of them. So that's the edit button. Comments will take you down to the bottom where you can put inline comments. I really love the comments. I think it's an underutilized section. You can also just scroll down to the bottom and click comment and it opens up too. But I think it is underutilized. And I think a lot of times what I've seen is that folks will put in the description things that probably could have been handled in the comment section, or we go back and forth in email talking about things that can be done in comments. So let's just say that Jordan and I were having a conversation about this particular issue, but we're having it either in Teams or in email, and Jordan hits the lottery and leaves. Well, no one's gonna have. I will be or both of us. We go in on lottery tickets and we both hit the lottery and we're gone. Whoever comes behind us and picks this project up isn't gonna be able to see what we talked about. They're gonna have to start from scratch, and they're gonna have to try to translate anything that we have in the description field or acceptance criteria as best they can, right? Versus if we put that conversation in comments, whoever comes behind us can just look in the comments and see any kind of decisions, questions, any of those types of things that we've already addressed down there. So I really like the comments field.
And what's the cool way to send a comment to somebody, Brett?
You say that again?
What's the cool way to send a comment to somebody?
Yeah, so if you mention them in the comment, it'll send them an email and let them know that they were mentioned. So I think you have to, if you put the @ symbol and you pick someone. So if I picked Adam and then I put in my comment, he doesn't even have to come, especially if it's an information only and it's not a question. He doesn't even have to come to JIRA to know, but it will give you the same thing as an email would give you, which is just sending an email to that person. So, but it also saves it in your JIRA record too.
And I want to stress that to this team. We want to use the comment section always. Instead of having discussions on email or chat about an item, use the comment section because it documents every single thing we did. And that way we don't have to go back and transcribe anything later. So Brett, that was an excellent point. Thank you.
Yep.
Can you stop there just for a sec? So with the comments, is that almost like a chat, or is it you're just posting comments and
it can be like a chat. I've had
Well, it's actually
conversations.
it's posting comments, but it's associating with the issue. So instead of having the Teams chat or Jabber chat associated between you and the other individual, it puts it with the issue that you're talking about it. So everything's together. So, like he said, if you win the lottery, you get hit by a bus, you're not here tomorrow, someone has all the history and they can go through and say, oh, this is what they were talking about. This is where they're going with that. And it just helps out for this specific issue.
Can you
Yeah,
break
so-
the comments out into like subjects or stuff like that? Or is it just comments straight up?
They're just comments in time order.
Mhm.
Okay. All right.
You can literally do anything you want down there. You can put comments just for yourself. You can put comments for somebody else. You can put, I worked on XYZ. This is what I found. This is what's holding me up. This is a cool thing I noticed. This is the work I did to get where I'm at. This would be anything that you feel is relevant to the issue that you're working on. And if you want to include someone, all you do is hit @ and it sends a message to them. They can respond literally to that message and it puts it back in the comments thing. It's easy, it's fast, and it keeps all the collaboration in one spot regarding that particular issue.
Well,
And you can,
my
and
thing
you,
about it is you got Jabber, like you're saying, you got Teams. I wouldn't want to add another layer of communication without, maybe taking some away from the others like you're talking about. Does that make sense?
Well, this keeps it together with the issue, and this is the preferred place to put it.
Okay.
We use Teams for group meetings, but if you're working on a story and you have a question for Scott, you would want to do it in that story in the comments so that anything you and Scott discussed would be linked to that story. And anyone looking at that story, if you put it visible for all, would be able to see those comments. The whole idea is to keep the story together. Everything that was done in the development process should be associated with this story, not stored on a flat file on your system for your Teams chats or a different flat file on your system in your Cisco Jabber chats, because then nobody else has access to it.
Yeah,
Nobody
100%.
knows what you were looking at or what you discussed or what you came up with. This is going to work for this situation. And then they have to regenerate the whole thing again if you're gone.
exactly. Yep. That's the biggest point. And if what, kind of the climate that we're in right now has taught most of us one thing, it's that we don't know when the person that we're working alongside is going to be moved to a new project. Like you said, wins the lottery and is not here anymore, whatever the case may be. So these things, having the comments, I can't stress enough how important the comment section is and how underutilized it has been. I've seen it. I was just clicking through some of the other stories. I've seen it start to be used a lot more now because we're seeing a lot of folks moving from project to project and priority shifting so much. But it is really tough when you get a story and you're asked to work it, and you have no idea what the context or if there are resources or when I say resources, not people resources, but just documentation somewhere else that needs to be added. You have no idea what that context is, but the comment section is a really good place to put that. You can put attachments, you can put links in here. It is HTML formatting, so you can pretty much do anything you can do in an email, you can do right down here in a comment. Even has emojis and smiley faces down there, which I haven't seen used yet. All right, so that was the comments. You can also assign, these buttons up here you can use to assign. And most of these buttons at the top, there are, well, actually in JIRA as a whole, there are multiple ways to get to things. So, which I think is really cool. So everyone can have kind of their own system of getting to the same place. Like I said, comments are down at the bottom. You can either scroll there or you can click here. Same thing with assigning. So there's a people section over here where you can do the same thing. You can assign different people, or you can click the button at the top to assign people to. And then there's more. So there's a lot under more. I won't go through every single one of these, but I will touch on the tracker. This is a really cool, if you struggle with logging time and remembering logging time, and you want to log the time that you spent on a specific ask, epic, or story or bug, you can click the start tracker, and there will be a little tracker that pops up. Actually, I'll go ahead and start. I just won't save it. A little tracker pops up down here, and it automatically logs that time to this record, whatever record you're on. And when you stop it, it pops up with the log time screen. You just click log time, and it'll log the time that you spent. I won't save it for this one. And then you can click the X if you want to get out of it. Since I didn't log my work, I'll click confirm that I don't want to log time on it.
There's also a pause where you don't have to
Yes.
enter anything until you stop it. So it just there's quite a few things that timer can do for you.
Yeah, very useful, particularly when I first started logging time. It was very useful. And even sometimes when I just get lost in the work and I don't know when I started, don't know when I finished kind of thing, the tracker is really useful for that. And it stays up there until you exit out of it. So it'll stay on the screen. Even when you move to a new record, it'll stay there. So if it's something that you really like, instead of trying to, kind of jot down how much time you're spending on a certain record, the tracker is a really cool way to do that. You can also move this record up and down the board. So you can rank it at the top, you can send it to the bottom. You can attach files, which there are multiple ways to attach files. You can drag from your folder and drop it on the screen anywhere, and it'll attach it. You can attach files in the different fields. So like I showed in the comments, there's also an attachment button here, and there's one in the description field as well. If you attach items in the acceptance criteria or description, it's going to attach it wherever your cursor is. So if you don't necessarily want it to show up in the box in that field, then it's best just to assign it either under more, or attach it under the more button, or just at the bottom. There's an attach section at the bottom too, where it shows all your attachments. And then I'll skip down to you can create a subtask, which is very useful, particularly for devs, but for everyone. I mean, everyone can use subtasks. Some teams use them differently than others. I've seen some teams not use them at all, but you can create a subtask straight from the story record.
We'll get into those more with the dev training. Yep.
Sweet. And then you can move it. So if you wanted to move this to another project or issue type, you can move it here. And then linking. So linking, I do want to stay on this one for a second. So you can link several different ways. You can click the link button under more, and then you have a drop down where you can stipulate what kind of dependency this story has on another story. So if it's just related, I shouldn't say just related, if it's related to another story where there is a relation at all, you can do relates to. Mentions is automatically associated if you mention one record in the description acceptance criteria of another record. So if you just type out the story number, for example, so if I typed CCA-77 in the description of CCA-78, which I actually did, I think, it'll show down in the issue links section. Yeah, 78. It'll show that it's mentioned by 75 and also mentioned in these iteration bugs, and it's related to 78. So it'll show all of your links down at the bottom, and you can also link them down at the bottom down there too. The other thing that you can do in the links is if it's blocked by, and this is another one that I think is somewhat underutilized. So back to the earlier point of, if you have multiple stories, but you don't want to send them, you don't want to release them all out to production at the same time, you can use blocks. This one blocks or is blocked by another record. So if work needs to be done on this story before work on another story is done, or can even be worked, you can say this story blocks 78, for example. Or
And
if it's vice versa.
the
Go
thing
ahead.
with this block buy is we want to use these if some other, if Project X has to do something before we can complete our story, we want to link to the Project X story that's blocking our story so that when that story is complete, we can link across project teams, and we want to do that so that we can show why we're not making progress on any given thing when we promised it to the business that we're waiting on somebody else.
And
That
just
is
a
a
point,
fantastic point.
yeah, just a point of reference on this. This does not stop anything. This is literally just a flag that shows up that says, hey, this is blocked, or this is blocking something else. It doesn't stop you from doing the work. It doesn't stop you from rolling this to production. It doesn't stop anything. It is literally just a flag of notification. That's it. I wanted that to be very clear with everybody.
Yeah. Yeah. And so to the point of having dependencies on other teams, that's also something that we've seen a lot here lately, is that we're not documenting the dependencies between projects or between lanes. And there are cross lane projects going on right now where specifically with a team like Project X in our ERPs that drive data or functionality out to some of our other projects. It's very important to make sure that we're linking and showing those dependencies across teams. One, so that we can show the business, these are the dependencies, for even from a resource, how many resources it's going to take to get something done that may seem very small to the business. They don't know behind the scenes all the dependencies that just changing this one thing may have. The other side of it is it may push out timelines, all those things. It just helps at a higher level to be able to say, yeah, the reason why this is going to take 2 months, 3 months, 2 weeks, whatever it is because we also have dependencies on these other teams too, and we have work on those teams. So we can adequately say this is how many resources it's going to take to get that one thing done. The other side of it is for us as teams, as we're a team of teams, so that we can know the dependencies we have on each other. So if I don't know, if I'm just off in my corner working on, for example, sales assistant, and I have no idea that the work that I'm doing is holding up work that, someone on the ATK team is needing to do. If I can't see this dependency, or if someone can't tell me, hey, remember that the story that you're working on right now is blocking a story on the ATK team too, so that it shows on both boards as we're working through them. Then sometimes I don't know that. And it's just good to have those dependencies between the two teams. Like Jordan said, it's not going to stop my work and it's not going to stop your work. We can still do it. But it is good to document those dependencies so that we know where they lie. And then, lastly, for accountability, that I think we alluded to too. So we assign accountability across teams to say, all right, well, look, I know I'm the one that's working on this story, but there are other teams working on it too. It's not just a one man band kind of thing. So that one I think is probably, to me, has been the least used, but is starting to get a lot of discussion across multiple teams. But we have to start using those dependencies across teams a lot more. And then the rest of these I think are somewhat self-explanatory. You can clone different stories. So if there's something that you did in the past and it's routine, and you just want to clone it, you don't want to have to create the entire story again from scratch. You can clone them, and you can link them that way to say, all right, this was cloned by, or clones the next story. Same thing as duplicate. I've actually had a couple of situations where I created a story and someone created a bug, so we link them using duplicates. And then also when we talked earlier about splitting, you can use splitting to link them as well. That's somewhat the Cliff Notes version of that too. But I think that the takeaway to me is the mentions relates to, and definitely the blocked or blocked by. Those are the ones that I would concentrate on the most. And then lastly, at the top, you have your statuses. So as you're moving, it's very important as you're moving through the kind of the life cycle of a story and an epic that you're making sure that the statuses are updated. What I've seen is as we're starting to mature on JIRA, one thing I've seen, I saw at the very beginning is as things are moved from analysis to I think the next one is requirements, I believe, or something like that. I can't remember, or
Yeah.
groom. I think the next one's groom.
Yeah, go ahead and open up that workflow real quick.
All right. So as things come, so you open it and you move it into analysis once you start working on it. Once you start trying to figure out what do I need to do to make this happen, that sometimes can be the conversation that we talked about earlier instead of a spike. So you just want to pull someone aside and have some conversations, then you pull it into analysis once you start analyzing what you need to do before you even start gathering the requirements. And then you gather requirements at the tail end of that. Then you move it to groom, and that's where you start to sit down with. I some BAs do this a little bit differently, and some teams do. Um, Personally, I have groomed my stories with the BRM and the development team separately. So I'll sit down with the BRM to say, hey, this is what I documented out. Let me just make sure I'm on the right path. Usually a really quick conversation to say, hey, I just want to make sure that we're moving in the right direction. And then also to make sure that my priority that I heard is the priority that the actual priority. So I just want to make sure that I'm moving in the right direction, and then I'll sit down with the dev team to say, all right, well, what are we gonna need to do to make this actually happen? And that's when the dev team bounces around different solutions to make it happen. Is at the grooming stage. Sometimes this is done all in one meeting, right? Like sometimes it's done in one meeting. Sizing is the same thing. So once you get to groom and we figured out what it's going to take, then we can make an educated guess at how long and how much effort it's going to take to make happen. So then we move it to size. So it's between groom, size, and to do. So once it's size, then we can move it to do. That flags the dev team to know, okay, cool. It's been sized, it's documented, it's ready for me to pick it up, and it's been prioritized. So I can go through my list, my backlog, and just start plucking the things from the top that have been sized and that are marked to do from the very top. Makes it really easy as we're starting to fill up sprints and we're doing our sprint planning. And then from there, once the dev team starts to work on it, it moves into development. Once the dev work is done, it's moved into code review, which is a really cool new status or newish status that we've created just to let us know that it's in code review before it moves to testing. And then that's when the QAs pick it up, typical QAs. But that's when we start to test. Once it's done testing, we move it into demo and then ready for production. Once it's been demoed, signed off on, says, yep, looks like exactly what we asked for. And then it's deployed. And then it's marked done. So I would say the biggest thing is to make sure that we're updating the statuses, not just because, it shows when you go to it, just generally it shows the status when you go to that particular record, but also it flags the next person in the life cycle, in the chain, to know they need to do something on it. One of the things that I love to do with grooming and sizing is I have a search criteria set up, and I don't think we'll have enough time. So if anybody wants some tips and tricks on searching and filters and that sort of thing, feel free to throw some time on my calendar. I would be happy to sit down with you. I don't know everything there is to know. I'm still learning, but there are some tricks that I've learned in the searching. So I have filters set up where I can go directly to, these are the issues that are ready for BRM review. Those are the ones that I've put in groom. The ones that are ready for sizing, and I say BRM review, it's also technical review too with the dev team. The ones that are ready for sizing are the ones that I have put into sizing status. So when I click on it, I don't think I have anything in there ready for sizing right now. But when I click on it, I can then, I don't. it gives me a list of all of the stories that I have that are ready for the sizing meeting. So that when I get to the sizing meeting, I'm not spending, 5-10 minutes like just jumping around the backlog. I can have it on a separate screen and we can just go from the top to the bottom really quickly. And I don't waste anybody's time. And then I also have filters for, there was another one in here, I thought, for to do. Maybe it just isn't showing in there. But that's what I use them for. That's kind of selfishly, if you're looking for a reason to make sure to stay on top of the statuses, is that it's because it can also let you know what you need to do next, and make it really easy for you to see what you have on tap. So that when Jordan asks me, hey, do you have anything for sizing today? I can just go to my issues, click on ready for sizing. And if I don't see anything in there, then that means I don't have anything. Same thing for my BRM Kurt. If he asks me if I have anything to discuss with him, I can quickly go to all of my issues that are in Groom. And if there's nothing in there, I can easily tell him no, instead of trying to go through the backlog and eyeball it or do it from memory. You can also subscribe yourself to that stuff so that it will email you on the day. Like you can pick a day. My groomings are usually on Thursday. So Wednesday evening, I have JIRA send me an email with everything that is in the grooming status. Same thing with sizing. So really cool stuff. These are just a couple of tips and tricks that you can use for the statuses. But again, I think the most important thing is so it signals the next person in line that you're ready for them to pick it up. You're ready for them to do whatever they need to do on that story. And it'll make Jordan's life easier as he's moving things through the sprint too, once it's in a sprint. But I'm sure y'all will cover that in the dev and QA session, that piece. I know we only have 3 minutes left. Are there any questions?
One more thing you can see on here is under that time tracking section, you see it's got 1 day and 2 hours were logged. And what the business is using our log time for is not only, they're bean counters. They want to know how much it is, but when a given ask is completed, they can go back to the business and say, we estimated that it was going to take 100 man hours and this took 250. So we validate, with our time expended and how much effort actually went into it, how much that given ask actually cost the business. So that's one of the other benefits of logging our time against all of these issues.
Yeah, great point.
We'll talk more about that too in the dev section, but there's also some capitalization and stuff that happens with that. But go ahead and show them the dashboard real quick. I see that you have one up.
Yes. Oh, that's my Confluence dashboard, but I can show you. So I have separate dashboards. I have the one that came with JIRA, and then I also have my self-serve dashboard. And you can default this to whichever one you want. So I have the sprint days over here, days remaining. I have my time tracking because I was slacking at the very beginning. I'm putting my time tracking in. So this will show you throughout the month how much time you've tracked against every record. I also have down here at the bottom my BRM review stories, which I don't have any right now. There's the sprint burn down, but you can add gadgets to it. You can edit the layout. You can create your own. But this is really cool. I really love the dashboards. I can't remember what's on the BA.
Ollie.
Oh yeah.
Ollie is jumping up and down for joy right now because he loves this stuff.
Yeah.
Thank you. Yeah.
Love the dashboards. I spent probably a good day and a half just messing around with the dashboards when I finally started to get stories and stuff like that to plug in. But here's the BA. The BA dashboard shows all of us, shows how many issues we have. Over to the side has all the asks, everything. And you can see it all on one screen. And like I said, it's super customizable, very easy to play around with. And there are a bunch of YouTube videos out there too where you can look to see what those different gadgets do and mean.
Good. Thank you.
Yeah, you bet. There's a bunch of other stuff too. The searching, I think, is very powerful once you get a hang of it. There's a bunch of different links. You can search by sprint, you can search by release, a lot of those different things. So if you do, like I said, if you have questions about how to find certain issues, any question about how to find something, just give me a ring, and we can throw some time on the calendar to talk through it. Made a lot of mistakes that I'm sure would help you guys.
Hey, Brett. Hey, Brett, if you don't mind, I would like Ollie to have a buddy to contact for any questions that he would have. Would you mind being that point of contact for him?
Nope, I'd love to.
Excellent.
Thank you,
So
Brett.
Ollie, if you guys can share contact information, he would be kind of your go-to. Can you go to the CCA board real quick?
Mhm.
I just want to go through like what a typical board looks like. So you're in the backlog view right now. It shows the current sprint. If you minimize that current sprint, this is your backlog. So unlike the other backlog that you see in TFS, you don't see the epics, you don't see the asks, you don't see any of that. However, those orange bars to the right and all that stuff over there to the right, is that your epic link? That's your epic link, correct?
Yep.
So that shows what epic it's linked to. The little numbers out there, that's your size of your story. He's got a couple other things on his that he looks at. Go to the current sprint board, active sprint. So those are stories. Those are individual stories. And you see the different columns: open, to do, in progress, code review, and testing and demo. And then there's another column over there that says ready for production, I believe. But that's all we'll have. Okay, so we won't be moving tasks. We'll just be moving stories, which makes it super simple. Every story will get assigned what they call a fixed version. If you go to our releases, every story will get assigned a fixed version, and what a fixed version is a release. So these are all the releases that we've done, what's in them. There's notes that we put. When we finish a story, all we do is just assign it to the next one that we want to put it in. It stays there. We don't have to do anything else with it. When we're ready to deploy, everyone knows exactly what we're deploying. We don't have to put notes in our stories anymore on when we're doing it. There's so many cool features about JIRA that you guys have yet to really get into and learn and see. But you guys are going to love it. And I think Brett did a fantastic job of giving you guys a general overview of the BA work that's involved, just to get us to the point of being able to do work from the development side. So I would say we're at our time limit. If you have any questions related to BA stuff, you can ask them now. You can wait until later this week when we've made a transition. We'll have some stuff where you can go in and look around, etc. But please feel free to reach out to Brett or myself, and we will get anything you need answered if we don't know the answer ourselves. So, Brett, any final words for the team?
No, the only thing I would say is in all of those components that Jordan just talked about, all those different pieces, they are shown on your story somewhere. So there's the sprint, there's the fixed version that he talked about. So if you click on any of those, and there's the epic link, if you click on any of those items, it will take you to the list of all of the stories and records in that particular release, sprint, or epic. Which is very useful. I use that way more than just trying to search individually. So it's really useful to see, hey, what went out last week, or I remember there was a story somewhere that was related to this one. I needed to figure out what else went out that same time. So yeah, perfect. So there's so much in here that it would take a lifetime to go through. So I can't stress enough, if you have questions or if you get stuck, I've bumped around here enough. I may know the answer to it, so just don't don't hesitate to reach out to me.
I got a quick question, Scott. What about POC after an ask? I'm not sure what that means.
Well, management likes to ask for things because they think everything's easy for SIT geniuses, and sometimes they'll come up with an ask that might be adding devices or servers, or even might be something that might not be possible as we know the current construct of the language that we work in. Do you ever go back and do a proof of concept after an ask's been done, just to show that what they're asking for can or cannot be actually done?
Absolutely, absolutely. The entire ask process is completely different than what you've seen before. There's a slightly different workflow. There's a proof of concept. There's all different types of directions that you can take and ask, and that is something that I am handling currently. When Gary gets back on board from furlough, that's part of his responsibility. So definitely, there's always that option. The ask goes through PIG, which is basically an approval process, and from there it can go in any direction. If it requires a proof of concept, if it just said, "Yep, we're good for that," just put it in and see if we can get it prioritized, et cetera. But good point, Scott. And yes, that is handled in the ask process.
Other than that, just a comment. This is extremely organized, and there's a lot of functions and features and tools in here. For us first getting into this and using this may feel like a little cumbersome because we're always pushed to deliver everything now. The business just is not on the patient side of things. But I could see in the long run, once we get used to the tools and the handling here, I won't have to keep, say, for instance, a separate log file of the work I've done. Having something open and working in it and relating it to other parts of the system, I think is going to be a lot easier. And then, especially when it comes to recording what you've done and the conversations, I like that part of it, because how many times do you forget when you talked to somebody 2 or 3 weeks ago about something, and you need to refer back to that information. Finding it there versus searching emails is a ton easier.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
and the beauty of this is that the tool is going to take us some time just to get used to, but productivity won't slack at all, because the actual development process, there's no change. You guys go out and do your code, you do your work. You don't have to move things around. You're going to log some time, whatever. But I think you'll see it from the dev standpoint when Rob gets with us, and I see that you all accepted it 2:00 instead of 1:30 today is the development training. But I think you'll see just how easy it is to make this thing work. So once again, any final comments or questions for Brett? I think you did a great job, Brett.
Thanks. I was going to show really quick. There's from a BA and BRM perspective too, in Confluence, it's kind of the next step of it is the more you use JIRA, the more you can relate in Confluence. So you can have your requirements, all those conversations that you have in a meeting. You can do meeting notes and link them to, or link the JIRA story to it, so that if you go to your meeting notes, you can say, "Oh, that was the story number," and you can have a link directly back to JIRA. So there's a lot of really cool stuff. But yeah, if you need help with any of that stuff, just let me know.
All right. Well, Brett,